Hello, everyone, and welcome to the, what is this, March edition of the Carrier's Edge webinar. My name is Mark Murrell. I'm a co-founder of Carrier's Edge, and today we are going to be talking about the thrilling subject of insurance risk reviews, loss control visits, insurance renewals, all of that exciting stuff. So this is a subject that came up as an idea because we have a lot of different insurance partners that we work with across North America, both on the underwriting side and on the broker agent side. And there's a lot of things that kind of come up as common things that they say to me about what they like fleets to do, what they don't like when they see fleets coming up for renewal, sort of the common problems. So I thought it would be a great subject for discussion, and no better person to have that discussion with than Travis Busch of Kunkel Associates, who joins me today. Welcome, Travis.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we've got a lot that we're going to cover. We started just kind of going over the high points yesterday and burned through, I think, about 40 minutes, just sort of covering the high bullet points. And that's not even getting into details. So I think we're going to have lots of stuff to talk about today. But before we get into that, Travis, can you give everybody sort of the 2-minute overview of Kunkel Associates and your role and sort of your background as well?
Sure thing. Yeah. So Kunkel Associates is an insurance broker. We work kind of all over the U.S. We have clients in over 40 states. Essentially, our role, for those who don't know what an insurance broker does, is companies hire us to buy their insurance for them. Especially larger companies, there's complex lines of coverage, and they have to have an expert who understands, how to evaluate their risk and help them transfer that. My role, I've been with Kunkel since 2014. I was actually one of our first interns while I was finishing up schooling. And then for the last five-ish years, I've ran the safety and analytics department. Essentially what that means is helping our fleets that we insure, understand not only the risk portion that they're dealing with on the insurance side, but also on the loss control side. And compliance side. The other half of my role is the analytics side, which is helping them understand their data and their numbers, which is huge, obviously, in our space. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Okay, and we're going to get into several of those topics as we go through the session today. So what I want to start with is, when you're going, let's sort of, look at the scenario where we've got a fleet whose insurance is up for renewal, and you're having that conversation with them. Maybe the insurer is asking for an increase or is putting some conditions on it, has some concerns. So you're going in there and having that discussion with the fleet. What are the most common issues that you see as you're talking to all of these different fleets about all of the different things that they're doing? What are some of the common things that you see that everybody sort of falls into the trap with? Places where they maybe make mistakes or things they overlook that end up being problems for them later on?
Yeah, I think the most important part for our clients, our fleets that we insure, is an undereducation or underappreciation of their data. And by that, I mean a vast amount of data. Something as simple as understanding their loss history. That's very important. Some people think that they, have historically great loss history because they don't fully understand what their loss history actually means. Some people conversely think that they have, bad losses because they've had claims, but in the scheme of things, it's actually pretty solid performance. Yeah, and then, beyond that, when we talk about the safety side and the loss control side, understanding their data on SMS, the safety measurement system, obviously, understanding the trends and how things are looking, because, they may have historically had very, very solid performance on the safety side, and it may be trending in the wrong direction, but in their mind, they they may not understand or realize what's happened over the last 3, 4, 6 months. And obviously it's, 2 years of data out there for public view. So all of that, number one, I would say is understanding all of their data. And it goes beyond just losses, claims, and, their safety performance.
So there's two things that you touched on there that I want to drill down into a little bit more. The first one is sort of, I guess, broadly speaking, context, that they look at their own numbers and they don't really have sort of comparison. They don't have a context of how that compares to everybody else. So how important is that when you're looking at sort of the bigger picture, to understand, rather than understand the absolutes, but understand how that matches with other similar fleets? That sounds like that's a big deal.
Yeah, we think benchmarking is very, very important. And it's a topic that's especially important now as insurance costs keep rising. Not only to benchmark how I'm performing, but how am I, is the amount that we spend on our insurance appropriate? Is it high compared to my peers, or is it low? It seems like, when I started, 10 years ago, if you want to say that, a lot of fleets would say, well, my friend pays this much, and not actually having context for why they're being charged what they are on either
Right.
way. So benchmarking is super important. But when we look at, just strictly loss performance, one really easy metric that people can evaluate on their own, can kind of have their own little thermometer on how they're performing, is just how much do I have in claims versus how much do I pay in premium. We just call that loss ratio, but anything under 50%, we're saying the insurance companies are going to be relatively happy. Obviously, if it's zero, the insurance companies are very happy, and it should be easy for you to obtain coverage elsewhere if you want to. But once it starts creeping over 50% into the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and if it gets to 100 plus, we have big problems. But if that percentage of how much I'm paying for premium versus how much they're paying out in claims, if that percentage swings the wrong way, that's the things that make renewals obviously very challenging. And this is not foreign knowledge. I mean, I think everyone knows, how my claims stack up, but when you look at it just on a simple percentage, that's vastly important.
Well, one of the other pieces of context that you're alluding to there is trends. So yeah, your numbers today are less important than what they represent as a change over last year, right? So if you've got a particular number, I don't know, let's say you've got a DOT reportable of 0.3, well, maybe that's great if last year you were 0.7, but if last year you were 0 or 0.01 or something like that, that's a very different trend. So if you're trending in a particular direction, the numbers on their own may not be as significant as what that direction is suggesting. I see that a lot coming up, that people are just looking at the absolutes and they're not considering the trends or the pieces that are contributing to those numbers today.
Yeah, I started speaking on that and then I realized that I was frozen. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
So yeah, I totally agree. There's something to be said about how your numbers are today. But the numbers that are on a loss report today are not indicative of what they're going to say when the insurance company is done paying, and that's an important concept to understand. Obviously insurance companies reserve and they try to reserve appropriately, but that's not necessarily the best way to understand the development that's going to happen on your loss report. But beyond that, I think the trending alone is important to say, hey, maybe I'm still at under 50% loss ratio and, have been forever, but it's important to know, maybe 3 years ago you had 0 claims, and last year you had a few claims that had some meat to them, and then this year you have a few more that have some meat to them. It's important to understand that while my overall picture may look very good, the insurance companies, their job, if you think about an underwriter's job at baseline, is to make money, and so they're trying to figure out and evaluate any way they can to get as much premium as possible without losing a client, and hopefully they can clear losses and then some. So,
Well, one of the other things that I find interesting that many of our insurance partners mention is when people have a significant change in their loss ratio 1 year over the previous year, and don't really have a good explanation for it in either direction. It might be that things are a lot better now than they were, or it might be that things are worse. But one of the things that certainly our brokers express frustration with, and I see the underwriters kind of scratching their heads at, is when people don't understand why these changes are happening. So let's talk a little bit about that, and what you see and what you tell. I guess that comes back to understanding the data, right? Understanding what's actually going on in the business.
yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. A company's risk profile, from a top level may have improved substantially year over year. Maybe they didn't have a mid-sized company didn't have a safety director, and now they have someone dedicated to it. Maybe they upgraded their equipment. Maybe they embraced safety technology. Maybe they started doing, remedial training. Maybe they started doing ongoing training through CarriersEdge. There's a lot of things that may improve a company's risk profile, while the loss run may say that they had a terrible year. Because there's things that you can plan for and things that you can't. And that obviously is reflected in how you perform, in a dollars and cents, aspect from an insurance company. But that's why they hire loss control specialists.
Travis is frozen again. So, okay. Well, I expect that he'll be back in a second, and then we will continue. We'll pause for commercial messages at this moment. And let's see. Oh, you're back.
I don't know what's going on. I really apologize.
Yeah, that's fine. So that's one of the other things that I wanted to ask about, that is sort of one of the things we talked about yesterday as things that fleets sometimes do to cause problems or to sort of undermine, undermine their programs, is driver hiring guidelines. So we talked a little bit about that. So let's dig into that a little bit and what you see as sort of common issues around driver hiring.
Yeah, so hopefully I get through this without my internet. You never have IT problems, and then you do on the day that you're hosting a live webinar. So I'm sorry. Yeah, so on the driver hiring side, I see most often that fleets fail on. I can't necessarily tell my clients that they failed on it, but what I see most often as a bad answer that's given to a loss control rep or an insurance company or an underwriter, it revolves around hiring guidelines. Their perception of their answer is much better than the actual perception of their answer. And so the answer that I see almost every single time I'm visiting with clients is, the loss control representative or the underwriter will say, hey, tell me, do you have a copy that you can just slide me of your, written hiring guidelines? And almost always the motor carrier will say, I follow along with my insurance company's guidelines. But their perception of that, the motor carrier thinks that they're saying, I'm flexible to do whatever the insurance company tells me to do. What the loss control rep or the underwriter is hearing is, you'll hire anybody that you say I can let you hire. You don't
have a plan, basically.
Yeah, the perception of that answer is much different than how they feel. They feel that they're being accommodating to the insurance company, but the insurance company is hearing is, you'll hire anybody who meets our minimum guidelines. So that's, guidelines are, again, just minimum guidelines, but the perception of the answer is not very good.
So that's one of those things that not only undermines you at insurance renewal time, but can come back to bite you in court as well. Oh,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you could be viewed as completely negligent. You don't even have a minimum standard for who you can hire. Well, our insurance company does. Well, you don't.
Well, it's funny. One of the things that we see in the Best Fleets to Drive For program a lot is when we ask people about their new entrant, do they have any sort of program to help new entrants? And the number of people that say, oh, our insurance company won't let us hire anybody with less than 2 years experience. And so in the first few years, I didn't know any better. So I just took it at face value. And then I started asking the insurance people, what's the issue with 2 years, and why do you never, how are you going to get anybody new in the industry if you don't let them hire people with less than 2 years? And every insurance person is like, that's not true. We would totally let them do that. They need to have a finishing program. They need to show us that they're going to train people. They need to do a bunch of different things, but we would absolutely let them hire that. And so it ends up as a sort of a cop-out, right?
You're totally right. But a lot of people are unaware of the potential for finishing programs and the ability to take a driver who is,
He keeps leaving us hanging. He's about to give us a great answer, and then he just freezes. He's teasing us. I expect he'll be back in a second. And Kelly, I'll get your question as well. Okay. You left us hanging there.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to try to unplug and just go straight to Wi-Fi because I'm guessing I'm having a problem with my wired connection for some reason.
Yeah.
Where did you hear me until?
Start the whole thing over.
Okay.
The cop-out. The fleets
Yes,
that use
I'm
it as a
sorry.
cop-out.
Golly. I would say for our insureds, we constantly educate on the ability to have a finishing program. You also avoid drivers who have bad ingrained habits potentially that you don't see because they've been driving for 20 years. So it is really appealing to be able to bring someone on and train them the way we want them to drive. But I would say it's not totally a cop-out because I think a lot of motor carriers are not aware that they even have the option of a finishing program. Sure. But for many, it is a cop-out. They don't want to spend the time. It is an investment to do that with, just not, specifically on your time, but, to have two guys in a truck instead of one, while only one of them is generating revenue, that is a challenge. But the potential for a finishing program, I would say any fleet who, performs well, they're not one of the people who has, 6 alerts on their safety profile and they're not having 100% loss ratio every single year. Those are the carriers that are not going to be eligible for a finishing program because insurance companies probably battling with themselves now on, do we even want to keep writing this risk? But the people who perform well and have good rapport with their insurance company, that's absolutely a possibility. You may or may not be aware of it though.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Yeah, that it is an option that's available to most fleets. You just have to talk to the insurance company about it. Yeah. One of the other things that we see coming up, it's sort of a common point, is this business of small fleets that say they can't do stuff. And, I'm sure you hear it all the time is, oh, well, all of this stuff is fine for the big fleets. They can have a scorecard, they can have these telematics, and they can have people evaluating all these things, but our small fleets can't possibly do that. Now, I know that that's not the case, but I'm sure you're seeing it as well. I imagine you see small fleets that are doing those kind of things that are able to have full featured programs as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's an extensive base of data out there that most fleets have access to that they don't utilize, or they don't utilize to its fullest capacity. Cameras are obviously a big one in the industry right now, event recorders, if you want to call them that. But within that, there's technology built into those things that tells you telematics data about hard brake, hard acceleration, hard cornering, maybe even near miss events where there's a hard brake, accompanied with a camera clip. And a lot of times that data is used by the smaller fleets ineffectively. And that's where they say, well, the large fleets can have a staff that watches that stuff and addresses it. But I also argue with a lot of our clients about, they're actually uniquely positioned to have hands on all of their drivers, because it's easier to manage 20 or 30 than it is to, manage 3,000 or whatever that may be. But it's about prioritizing where you spend your time, and I gave you the example yesterday. If I spend 1 hour of my time arguing about a tow bill with somebody, or arguing with my insurance rep over something, or 3-hour meetings on something, maybe my time would be better spent addressing some of those things. And I also have clients who have, 1,000 text messages on their phone. And I'm sure there's probably some people, maybe even in this group, who have 1,000 alerts, and it's paralysis by analysis of there's so much data coming in that there's so much data coming in that they can't possibly manage that. Well, then you need to reevaluate what your triggers are, right?
Mhm.
You need to minimize the events so that when you get them, you can do things with them and make impactful change. Additionally, if you have 1,000 text messages or emails with events and you're not addressing them and you're deposed, it's
You're
very
dead.
negligible.
Yeah, you're dead at that point.
The keys of the company are on the table at that point.
Well, you made a really good point that smaller fleets sometimes have a great advantage because they can get to know every single driver. And through that, they can start to refine those alerts and look at the data that's coming in and say, okay, these aren't the things I really need to be worrying about, but these other things are, and sort of prioritizing the time that way. And you, talked about haggling over a tow bill or haggling over something else, or dealing with something else that maybe isn't, might seem sort of important in the moment, but over the long term isn't going to help. And that can be challenging. I mean, we all have things that we're trying to juggle where there's the short-term fire that I want to put out now versus the longer-term thing that's going to help me down the road. And it's always sort of tough to figure out how to balance those, but it is definitely worth putting some time into building some systems or refining the systems that you have, building some process within the company so that you can have better information coming in and that you can really do something with that information and make a meaningful change. It will absolutely pay off down the road. Absolutely pays off.
And you're spot on. And, everyone always says, initiatives and management always comes obviously top down. You're uniquely positioned again in that 30, truck fleet that we gave an example of, or even 50 or 60, the ones I would consider small to mid-sized fleets. The owner can have a one-on-one conversation with all of their drivers to talk about these things. That doesn't happen in the large fleets. So, you do have a unique position there to make better and more impactful change.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we were talking about yesterday when we were sort of prepping this is the idea that sometimes the smaller fleets will say, okay, I want to have a good program so that I have a good story when the insurance is coming up. So they go out and they find a bunch of free stuff on the internet and, okay, here's my safety program. It's we tell these drivers to go watch these 5 YouTube videos, and we found this other document, or we photocopied this document from some fleet down the road, and that's now our policy on this. And so let's talk a little bit about sort of the right and wrong ways of doing that and some of the pitfalls that can come up with that kind of approach.
Yeah, there is a extraordinarily vast amount of things on the internet. Some that are great, some that are exceptional, and others that are free.
Great versus free. I love it.
Yeah. No.
Yes.
So the example I talked about yesterday, just in our short phone call, YouTube. There's a exceptional video on a level 1 inspection training. And I've watched it, and I advise other people to watch it. It's great. It's a half-hour long. And you could evaluate the same exact training through CarriersEdge, right? And do a inspection training on CarriersEdge. The biggest thing I talk about is, how are you going to prove in court that you had that driver watch that YouTube video? How are you going to manage? Not only the driver sat through it and listened to it, but also understood what was being presented to him. That doesn't really exist in those free resources. The other thing is, there's all other free resources out there too that are made available through people like, insurance companies, and like 10th Street has their own training platform that I'm familiar with, and it's okay, it's fine. But what does it say about, your own investment into safety if you know that there's a better solution out there that's inexpensive and you chose to go the route that saved you a couple $100?
Yeah, that's always the thing that sticks in my head is what happens when you're in court and the plaintiff's attorney asks you to, defend the fact that you went to looking for free stuff because you wanted to save a couple bucks?
Yeah.
That's the stuff that doesn't play well to a jury. So, but you make a really good point about sort of the importance of using sort of, free stuff to solve the problem today, but you also have to look at the solution down the road. What's going to help you down the road? So yeah, there may be a fantastic video. I think I know the one you're talking about on YouTube on inspection. It's excellent. And it's a really nice part of a training program. But if you don't document how you've done things, or, when you send people to watch it, or how you prove that they've actually done it, what you've done afterwards, you're not helping yourself down the road. Because then whether it's court 3 years from now, or the insurance renewal, when the loss prevention person comes in and says, let's talk about what you're doing to train your drivers, you don't have any real story there. You've got nothing to show for it.
Yeah, I always go back to deposition, and it's not because I'm a pessimist, but it's because it's our biggest fear on the safety side. And beyond the safety side, operationally, the last thing we want to do is wind up in court in a deposition, regardless of whether or not we have good answers. We don't want to be there at all.
Right.
But if you think about your position in that courtroom, tell me what you do for driver training, ongoing and remedial training. You say, okay, they watch a bunch of content, they do all of this stuff. It's great on YouTube. You can watch them. They're great. That's a horrible answer, no matter what verbiage you use, compared to, yeah, we partner with CarriersEdge. And we have ongoing training monthly, and we have remedial training for drivers who are having issues. It's all documented. We can see that our drivers are passing first-time tests at 95%. That's a much better answer. That could swing the needle on a verdict to the tune of who knows what.
So that goes back to your point right near the beginning about understanding the data that you have and the value of that data, right? And I'm just thinking as you're saying that yeah, you want to think about the deposition, not because you're a pessimist, or not because you spend so much time in court that you need to be thinking about that as a priority, but because if you have a good answer at that level, the other pieces tend to fall into place, right? If you're prepped for that deposition, if you've got a program that's really going to put you in good shape at that stage, you're going to do very well at the insurance renewal time. You're going to do very well when you've got a DOT audit or anything else that comes along. You're going to be set for all of those things. So that's usually why I tell people to think about it that way, is that it's not because you're in court all the time. It's because that sets you up for everything else.
Could not agree more. Yeah, well said. Well said.
Let's talk a little bit about the difference between policy and process. I mean, we always see our insurance partners saying, please make sure you have policies, please, have a policy about this and that. And a lot of the fleets sometimes think of it as, oh, I just need to have a policy and then I'm set. And I know what the fleets are saying is, please at least have a policy. Like there's companies that they go and evaluate that don't even have policies on anything. But you have to balance that. Like a policy that nobody pays attention to isn't really very helpful. But at the same time, you got to at least have a foundation to start with. So what do you typically tell your insureds in that area?
Yeah, it's something that we've been struggling with now more than ever, because everything has gotten so litigious that what you have on paper, it can help you, it can hang you as well, So, people have, I have insureds and clients that have hundreds of pages of policy about how drivers are supposed to drive or what they're supposed to be doing. I have a company who had a 15-page policy on speeding, which is
15 pages.
Outrageous. Do you think anyone's ever read that policy cover to cover? Maybe.
And if they have read it, do they know by the time they get to the end, do they even know what was in the beginning of it?
No, exactly. And beyond that, there was executable, action steps in there, when things happened, like a minor speed, 6 to 10. Well, if I get cited for it or I don't, it still counts because it's on our company's safety record, and there's actionable steps that document said that they were going to take. And, a lot of those times it wasn't actually happening, so what does that say then about the company? So I'm all for processes over policy, but there also has to be some balance. I think less is more when it comes to policy, but I also think it's important to have a reason why less is more. Not less is more because I'm lazy, but less is more because we have a well-established safety process in place on how we deal with things. And it's documented, sure, but it doesn't need to say everything. And, trucking defense attorneys will say the same thing. They'll say it's a lot easier to defend you in court when I could talk about what you do to make sure your company's safe than to try to defend against a document that you had written 15 years ago that no one's read.
Or that you have made so stringent and detailed that you can't possibly live up to it.
Yes, absolutely.
You see that sometimes, that people think that if they have a very thorough, strict policy, that they're protecting themselves, but it actually goes the other way. I mean, you made the comment that they're almost better to not have it before.
Yeah, and the example of the 20-year driver who's been with you and has done 2 million accident-free miles, and is never late. The ideal driver that everyone's wanting in the industry, right? You have a policy that says if he gets a major violation, maybe he had a reckless driving violation where it was he said, she said, and your policy says he's fired, and you don't do that. That's really putting the keys of the company on the table again, right? But beyond that,
but then in that situation, if you do fire that person, you end up killing your productivity. You've gotten rid of one of your best performers.
Yeah.
So as a business owner, how do you win? You can't win in that situation, right?
No, it's a lose-lose when you have those stringent policies that are unattainable.
Yeah. So it's funny. I've seen some people that are really well-regarded safe fleets that have very thin policies. In some cases, they don't really have much. I remember being at a safety conference a few years ago, and people were comparing their texting and driving policies. And a lot of people were very pleased with themselves for having a 3 strikes policy, and you're out after 3 strikes and that's it, no questions asked. The reality is they very rarely actually followed that because there's extenuating circumstances, or there was a really good performer. It was their star person who just won their driver of the year, and they didn't want to fire him or something like that. They end up making it way worse for themselves in terms of liability. And on the other hand, there's people that had next to nothing, where their policy was basically, we're going to investigate it as a group. We have a committee that looks at these things within a certain period of time after it happens, and we will decide as a group what the appropriate action is from there. Well, that's a lot easier to defend, especially if you're documenting the discussion, the inputs, all of your requirements, and then you talk about what you decided and how you followed up on that. Yeah, good point, Brian, that this comes up at those TCA safety conferences all the time. And that was what I was thinking of as well. But yeah, the people that have a process where they're going to evaluate and make a decision based on the full picture of the activities end up doing better than people that just sort of rely on sort of processes right there, and those, or they sort of just rely on policies. The policies are kind of, I don't want to say it's an artificial help. It makes you feel like you're safe and that you're better off and that you've covered your butt, but you really haven't.
Yeah. So. And I think it's an ongoing and changing conversation too. Years ago, if somebody, an insurance company would say, hey, send me a copy of their safety policy, and they didn't have one, I would say, hey, here's a sample, here's a template, take this and run with it. And then send it back to me, and we'll adopt this as your safety policy. I'm actually doing them a disservice, because if they're not taking real time and investing real time into what they want those things to say, and evaluating, are they better off having it or not? I'm maybe opening the door to them to have further scrutiny later in another area.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're sort of touching on in kind of every one of these points is the importance of documenting everything that you do. I think that's probably one of the biggest places where you see fleets hobble themselves, is that they don't have any evidence of what they've done. They may say they've got strict hiring guidelines for drivers, but they really can't prove it, or they say that they train their drivers, but they can't prove it. They've got a policy on something, but they can't demonstrate that they've actually followed it everywhere. So, sort of the underlying piece of that is whatever you do, always document it, always have it tracked somehow.
Yeah, I think in my experience, safety professionals in trucking over document maybe, but
That's a thing.
There's a reason for that though,
Yeah.
it's exactly what we're talking about. If you can't prove it, then it's worthless, so I totally agree with what you're saying.
Well, and the other part of that, it's not just if you can't prove it, it's worthless. That's absolutely a baseline. But if you haven't got it documented, then you can't evaluate it afterwards. How are you going to do sort of continuous improvement on your safety program, or even know really what's going on if you don't have any data to look at? Sort of going back to your original point about understand the data that you have, it isn't just for proving that you did things and didn't. I mean, that's sort of table stakes, but also what's working and what's not working. If we're going to look at the small fleets that are wearing 1 million hats, how do you know which are the right hats to be wearing? How much time do we be putting into different things? If you don't take advantage of that data and look at it and say, well, this is working really well, so I can spend less time on it. This other thing here is kind of stumbling and I need to actually fix it. Or this other process is really clunky and isn't giving us the results that we want. Then we need to adjust it. That's where you can really make some improvement over the long term.
Yeah, where I see that needing more attention across almost every fleet is on their orientation with a new driver. Again, it's a question that comes up with loss control reps and insurance companies all the time. Tell me do you have documentation on what your orientation looks like? Some people have orientation that lasts 4 hours or a day, and some people have orientation that lasts a week or longer, and you might know exactly what you do throughout that process, especially at a smaller company, because you usually do them the same way. But if you can't contextualize what that actually looks like, you can't evaluate, am I not spending enough time in one area or another? And did you onboard me the exact same way you onboarded the next driver? And if you didn't, why not? Maybe this driver needed more training on, backing up, something as simple as that. Maybe he needed more training on ELD. So his 3 days were more heavily spent on that. It's important to be able to know that, especially later on with that one particular driver of, hey, this is somebody we needed to spend more time on ELD training, or we didn't like something on the road test, so we spent an extra day doing that. If you don't document those things, you'll never know how you're performing, as an orientation process goes in general.
Well, you also will miss the blind spots. Everybody develops blind spots in their business just from doing the same thing sort of on a day-to-day basis. And if you're not evaluating that data in kind of an objective way, or sort of stepping outside of it and kind of looking back in, you miss those blind spots. We see this when we go through the best fleets to drive for evaluations. We have questions about new entrant programs. We have questions about onboarding drivers, and we have questions about ongoing training after the first year. And we see every year there are so many blind spots in the way that people answer those questions. And it might be that in their orientation, they're only thinking about how they onboard new entrants. And so they don't really have much of a thought to how they're onboarding experienced drivers. They may be doing it kind of the same way, or they may be putting all of their training into the orientation and not really thinking about what happens after that first year. Well, you want those drivers to stick around 5, 10, 15 years, but if all the training was in the first year, they've got a gap, they've got a disconnect there. And without having that data, it's really easy for them to kind of miss those things. Without taking the time to look at it, it's really easy to miss those things, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And so Brian put in the comments talking about, only have actionable items, talk about what sets up drivers for success in the company. If you train a 30-year experienced driver the same way you train a 2-year experienced driver, if your orientation looks identical, you're, okay, so for our orientation, we have you do 30 minutes on what is personal conveyance. First of all, actually, that's a bad example because it might be a good idea to talk about. What is an ELD? Do you think a 30-year driver wants to talk about that? I don't think they probably really do. They've been doing graph grids since they were on paper. they, it's a little different. And if you evaluate all those drivers in the same way, you might not have the best performance or success, I should say, on that.
Well, that is a really good point. The best onboarding programs that we see start with an evaluation of where the driver is at right now, because that 30-year driver, yeah, they know some of those things backwards and forwards because they've been on the road so long, but they also probably have some bad habits that they picked up that they may not even be aware of. So you want to figure out what those are and work with them on those things. And yeah, they're not going to know, or not going to need as much help on planning a load or something like that, or how to figure out where their stops are going to be, but they are definitely going to need to know the company and the business, and there may be some specifics of the equipment they need to know, and like all of that kind of stuff. So you definitely have to tailor it for people. Absolutely. Yeah. Good comment. Good comment there, Brian.
I just noticed we had a question from Kelly in the comments further back.
Yes, I'm coming back to that.
Okay.
So I'm going to hit you with that one when we get to the safety and insurance trends in a minute. The one question that I'm going to ask you then before we get to that is, what are the things that you see fleets doing that make you really happy? When you go in to evaluate a brand new fleet that is a new customer or a prospect, and you haven't looked at anything, you don't know anything about them, what are the things that you see that make you kind of sigh, sort of a breath of relief, that you're like, oh, thank God they have this? What are those things that jump out for you?
Yeah, I don't mean at all to beat a dead horse here, but when they truly have a good grasp on their data, when I had a meeting not very long ago that blew me away. I had a smile ear to ear, because when we started talking about, well, who's your ELD provider? Is there telematics data that goes along with it? Do you utilize that telematics data? They talked about their driver scoring and month-to-month improvement of driver scoring. And they talked about actionable events that occurred, and how they're decreasing month over month, and driver happiness and satisfaction is going up because they survey them. That was really, really cool. They truly understood everything that was going on in their fleet, because they spent the time to look into that. And it's one thing to know my SMS scores have been trending downwards, but that's only one fraction of what's actually going on inside your fleet. And loss control reps, specifically insurance company loss control reps, they obviously know all the public data out there. That's part of their job before they even walk into your door. Knowing those things. Well, hey, actually, 6 months ago, our unsafe driving score was at, 68%. Month over month, it's come down. Now we're sitting at 32%. Some people know that stuff without even having to look at a piece of paper. That goes a long way with an underwriter or loss control up as well. Like, these people get it and they're paying attention. Because at the end of the day, ultimately, what we're trying to prove is we know what's going on inside our fleet, and nothing's going to take us by surprise. That's the stuff that makes us
interesting. So there's another thing that you just touched on there. And that is, you mentioned that the company understands that their satisfaction is going up because they're surveying their drivers. Mm-hmm. And that's a really good point that we touched on it earlier, with the ability of the small fleets to be able to know their drivers really well. But as much as it's really important to understand your data and understand what data you have and what the metrics are, you can't disconnect the people from that. So your example of a company that knows the results because they're surveying their drivers is a fantastic one. We see, this is one of the things that we see makes a really big difference, is that the people that actually ask their drivers have better, you involve drivers in the process, you have a better result from it, whether that's a driver committee or a driver liaison or a regular survey, that you get them involved, then it becomes much more of a collaborative effort, and you end up with a much better result from it. So it's easy kind of for safety people to sort of step back and say, okay, I'm just looking at the hard data, I'm looking at this, I'm looking at that. But you still have to go and talk to people and see, why did this happen? Why did you do it this way? Which people tend to do sort of post-incident, but on a regular basis, going out to the team and saying, hey, what's working? What's not working? We made this change. What do you guys think of it? How's it impacting you? Is it creating other problems that we haven't uncovered yet that we should maybe be aware of? Having that sort of collaboration can make a huge difference.
Yeah, two things on that. And I think you're spot on again, listening to the drivers. I think every person who has ever interfaced with a driver would tell you that they love to talk they spend a lot of in a year, and obviously, but also something on the small fleets. You can see this all over the place. My internet connection's unstable. Can you hear me? I'm like,
No, you're
am I
okay now. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. What I was going to say is a lot of the smaller fleets, one of their biggest sales pitches is here. You're not just a number. That's something you hear all the time from smaller fleets. And then what I always say is, I've noticed this, and I can't stand when companies do this. Here, you're not just a number. And then when you call in, they're like, "Oh yeah, truck 89 called in, and he said,"
I see that all the time. Yes.
You're not a number. But then, yeah, I think that's, if you're doing that as a motor carrier, maybe evaluate, the way you're saying, who this driver is.
Yeah.
John is not just a number, but when John calls in, you say truck 89 needs this,
Well, what I've realized is that those are kind of the fallbacks that people use when they don't really have the language to describe how they create a good environment. So they fall back on, we have an open door policy, we treat everybody like family, and you're a name, not a number. Well, everybody says that. So what does it really mean, right? Everybody implements it a little bit differently, but yeah, you need to work on building the culture and building that sort of community as much as the specific safety results. The good culture, the good community, people that are invested in the business and feeling like they're part of something will go a lot farther towards having a safe program than people who just feel like they're disconnected.
Well said. Well said. Yeah.
So
culture and safety go hand in hand, obviously.
Yeah, so let's move on to sort of the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about is what you're seeing in the world of safety and insurance trends. And Kelly's question from earlier about whether people would see increases or decreases actually touches on what we were talking about yesterday in the trends area. So let's start by answering this. Let's see, would you expect the clients could expect to see no increase or a decrease even in this environment if they're ticking all of the right boxes? So that is very much what we were talking about, and sort of what's happening with the market in general, what's happening with renewals, are they up, are they down? So what are you seeing right now?
There's an important part of that question that she posed that we skimmed over, though. This is companies that have no losses, dedicated safety personnel, newer equipment. For those people, are we still going to see increases, or albeit an unlikely a decrease in premiums? So for the last, I would say at least 5 years, we've been in a very hard insurance market. Insurance carriers projected future losses, and those losses came in much higher than they expected. And in order to try to make some of that up, they took rate every year. They increased, the companies that had zero losses still got a 20% increase. Like, how is that fair, right? What I'm starting to see now in the last 3 to 6 months, I think they're catching up. There's statistics out there that say, that they may not be catching up. But just in our own experience of working with our clients and the interactions that we're having, it feels like the rates are almost caught up. But then again, we work with, partners in the insurance space that specialize in trucking. So, they're not the ones who enter the truck space chasing big premiums and then got, kind of hosed, for lack of a better word. And now, they're trying to make it back up. So, I mean, even some of the best companies out there, best insurance companies out there, I would say like the Century Insurance and the Great Wests and the National Interstates, the people who specialize in transportation, those companies felt the effects of it too, and they took rate. But it feels to me like they're catching back up. Their combined ratio, has been stabilized, or it is stabilizing. So it seems to me, I've had several renewals this year already in 2023 and at the end of 2022, where I saw the first few decreases that I had seen in 5 years. So that was really encouraging to me. But, it's hard to say on any one, person in particular, how their renewal is going to go, especially, if the insurance company is the one who takes on all the risk, you have no deductibles and stuff. It's, the insurance company may still want that increase, but it seems like it's softening.
Now, one of the things that tends to make a big difference there is the sort of number of players in the market. And, I've been around the industry long enough to see that when times are good, there's a lot of people that rush in sort of thinking, ooh, trucking, there's big money there. And then a few years later, when they had a couple of big claims, all of a sudden they're flooding out of the market instead. So what are you seeing now in terms of players coming into or exiting the market?
Yeah, we saw, I would say 6-7 years ago, tons of, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, we had 6-7 years ago, there was tons of insurance companies entering the space who had never done trucking before. But, over the last 5 years, there's been a mass exodus of insurance carriers. And now what we're starting to see is that's stabilized in the last couple of years. The same people who have been around are still around. But there has been some newer ones coming in on the technology space, utilizing ELD data, telematics data. So it seems like there's players that are stabilized, and there's a few new ones that are entering that we hadn't seen for years past, but there is a technology focus there for them, which is interesting.
Which is going to be the next question. Let's talk a little bit about InsurTech and what you're seeing happening there. So I've been sort of watching this for probably 10 years now. People have been talking about these different pay by the mile, pay per use kind of insurance plans. I haven't come across many people that are actually using them to have any sense of how well they're working. So what have you seen? You did mention that you've got some customers that are going that route. So talk about what you're seeing there.
Yeah, we had another comment on alternative risk programs as well as the increase in InsurTech. I guess those two things are much different. Let's segment them appropriately. The people who are going to alternative risk are looking at different ways to fund their insurance, like taking on large deductibles or joining into a group captive or single parent captive. There's a variety of ways to exit the market, but that's not the standard. I buy insurance, the insurance company takes on risk for me, and then my insurance company tells me next year what I'm going to pay. It's much different than that, and a lot of people are going that way for stability and trying to get out of that standard market. But on the InsurTech side, we have two providers that we use that have made a pretty good statement in the industry. We have several clients that have gone that way, and they're definitely having success. But with all things that are new and shiny, there's obviously stuff that's going on behind the scenes, and we don't know what that is yet. Obviously, it's very new. I would say if you're thinking about going down the path of an InsurTech company, obviously, even more so than normal, due diligence is important, because a lot of these are Silicon Valley, money coming in, and they think trucking is easy to understand because they got the data to prove it.
Oh yeah.
I'm a data
So
guy.
many of these companies that are coming from the Valley, now they can't get access to their cash because Silicon Valley Bank crashed last week. So you got to be careful for sure. So yeah, I would absolutely say people need to talk to their broker and find somebody who's reputable, who's stable, who's got a bit of a track record, and pick the right one. But do you see them being more attractive to certain types of fleets than others? Is there sort of a target customer that works well with them?
To me, what I've seen the most success with it on the small fleet side, I would say 20 trucks, probably up to 60 or 70. And the reason that they're having success over there is because the insurance carrier is giving them insightful information about their telematics that they otherwise would have a hard time processing or possibly even just ignore. So they get kind of an added benefit of having almost like a mini data and safety team at their insurance carrier, and it doesn't cost them anything. So the small to mid-sized fleets are the ones that I see having the most success on that side.
That's really interesting. You kind of have like a part-time outsourced safety data team that can tell you what's going on and where you need to be focusing your attention. Really interesting.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay. You also had mentioned you're seeing some changes on sort of fees and how the whole pricing of that is done as well. So what's happening there?
Yeah, there's a lot of volatility, and specifically in the InsurTech space, because the pricing can change month to month. It's not supposed to go up, but it can go down. And what I'm seeing more often than now than ever is trucking companies and even not trucking companies, but just companies in general, changing the way that they pay their insurance provider, going more towards fee than on commission structure. It makes absolutely no sense to me that if you pay more for insurance, that your insurance broker would get paid more. That doesn't make any sense. I hire my insurance broker with the hope and intent that my premiums go down.
Mhm.
So I see more and more companies going to fees. I recommend it, but it's something that you have to have a conversation with your broker on.
Yeah, it's really interesting. In the fee thing has been around sort of in certain segments for a long time, but it's really interesting that the InsurTech people are sort of doing this starting rate and then sort of giving credit for performance, kind of incents a certain type of performance, which could be really beneficial for the smaller fleets.
Yeah, and they're basing it on data that the fleet probably wasn't even looking at before.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, that's going to kind of bring us to the end here. We've got a few minutes left. I think, asked all of the questions that I had, and we've had some questions throughout, but does anybody else have any other last questions or comments before we wrap this up and let Travis go back to his day?
Let me say before we get any questions, if we do that, I'm so sorry about my connection here.
Oh, it's fine. I always like something to keep me on my toes.
There you go. Yeah.
Keep me working, yes. Okay, we do have a quick one. Yes, go for it, Kelly.
That's not a question.
I know where this is coming from. I have a feeling I know where you're going with this.
Me too. Is it the forward-facing, inward-facing debate?
Yeah.
Oh, are using cameras an incentive to insurance companies? No, but shoot, I shouldn't have. Now we got an additional question, but there are insurance carriers that we work with who provide, credits, premium credit or credits direct to camera vendors. But what I always tell everybody is no insurance company that I've seen to this day of the hundreds that are out there will tell you, if you have cameras, you receive this discount. Century Insurance has a percentage built in if you want to share the data or not, but not just for having the camera. So, when you evaluate the ROI on cameras, do I save money on insurance? The long-term answer is almost certainly yes, because you have potential for exonerations, but no one is yet has quantified if you have cameras, you save this much. So kind of stinks in that way, but it's good to have.
Well, actually, I'll jump in on that, this is one of those things where every insurance partner I talk to says the same thing as you just said, is that no, you're not going to get a discount immediately, but if you use the thing and use it properly, yes, you potentially have exoneration down the road, but more and more, the camera is the foundation for a coaching program. So you're able to see where those issues are, coach those drivers, and avoid problems down the road altogether. So it's a little bit like we get asked that same question about online training. If I sign up for your online training, will I get an insurance discount? Well, no, because just signing up for something doesn't help. Just signing up for a camera doesn't help because maybe you're not even using the thing, or maybe the camera's not even functional. But if you can demonstrate that you're using the thing, that you've got a process, going back to what we were talking about earlier, that you review the footage, that you're actually making sure the cameras work and you're doing something with it, then yeah, you're going to have a better story and it will help.
Yeah, we talk about that all the time, behavioral impact,
Yeah.
Not necessarily a quantifiable discount, but the behavioral impact on driving not techniques, but driving behavior, the impact you make with those cameras and Carrier's Edge and training, that's where you see the discount in the insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. I should have had that on my list already because I get it so often. But anyway, that will bring us to the end. So thanks everybody for participating, for sticking with us today. As always, you'll get the recording at the end and probably later today or tomorrow. And thanks, Travis, for your time. This was an excellent discussion.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Take care.